Nigeria's Foreign Minister Yusuf Maitama Taga has completed a high-profile diplomatic visit to the United Kingdom this week, reinforcing Nigeria's foreign policy priorities and advancing bilateral ties with the UK government. The minister held a successful meeting with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, continuing discussions initiated during Lammy's visit to Nigeria in November last year. Talks focused on trade, investment, climate, cooperation and security as both nations work toward a deeper strategic partnership. The minister also delivered a keynote address at Chatham House, one of the world's leading foreign policy institutions. In his speech, he emphasised Nigeria's 4D foreign policy framework: democracy, development, demography and diaspora, which aims to position Nigeria as a more influential and self-reliant global player.
Some of the alarm and uncertainty that we've seen in recent weeks in the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas is already a little familiar to us in Africa in general, and in Nigeria in particular. The existential threat to multilateralism and the rules-based international order, is it really as new as it might seem? Consider the wars in Sudan, Eastern Congo, the Sahel, and beyond. The UN is barely able to manage humanitarian support, still less solutions to end the fighting or prevent the next conflict. We know that clubs are only as good as their members. We've led calls for decades for reform and renewal to meet challenges that are so very different from that which the UN and other international bodies were created. We need to be honest about the rules-based international order. For more and more people, it is working less and less well. Memories may fade, but the response to the COVID-19 pandemic showed that some partners were very much more equal than others. Ever since I was a student, we were told Africa should liberalize markets, privatize, and deregulate. Now those same countries are talking about tariffs and restricting access to markets and capital. It is why Nigeria, to give one example, has expressed our concern over the polarizing implications of the Basel IV regulations and continues to push for reform of the global financial architecture. We know the playing field is not level, and we know the limits of partnership. Every country puts their interests first, but we believe there are many areas where those interests overlap with common interests. We see other countries now making very similar arguments, because sometimes it is still possible to run what Robin Cook called an ethical foreign policy, and at the same time protect more immediate, tangible national interests. Nigeria contributed to peacekeeping emergencies in the aftermath of independence in the 1960s. To date, I would say we have participated in 61. We supported liberation movements far from our own borders to end the racist regimes in Southern Africa in the 70s and 80s. We helped end the appalling wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone in the 90s. Because of our wealth and our size, we had the capacity to do so. It was also in our interest to do so when it was clear that no one else was going to intervene. The Technical Aid Corps in my ministry sends out volunteers to African, Caribbean, and Pacific nations for free. And yet, we get a lot in return in terms of trust, knowledge, and partnerships. We support efforts to deliver a peaceful settlement in the Middle East through a two-state solution, and we've supported the Palestinian people. We think that is the right thing to do, and we think it is the best way forward. As the debate swings back and forth, and now, at least in some quarters, back again on climate change, we understand only too well the contradictions and the challenges. In Nigeria, we sometimes have droughts and flooding in different parts of the country at the same time. We don't need to wait for future generations. Lake Chad, that used to be a vast inland ocean, is a tiny damp shadow of what it once was. And there are real-world consequences, combined with demographic change. Competition for resources has fueled tensions and violence between herders and farmers in Nigeria and across the region, and fertile ground for violent extremists to exploit a lot of young people with very little in the way of legitimate opportunity. And yet, as everyone in Europe and beyond has learned since 2022, energy security is also national security and an economic security issue and the foundation of a stable international system. Tell a country like Nigeria, which has now finally and painfully abandoned fuel subsidies, something we don't know. Unmanaged, these are some of the most significant triggers for violent extremism and irregular migration. Our problems are everyone's problems. Africa knows that if the transition to a more carbon-neutral energy equation is to be effective, there has to be a transition that is fair and equitable.